Air Force Two took a dive, and I went up against the ceiling and then settled back in my seat. Let's talk about campaign coverage. I traveled with the elder Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, in two campaigns, 84 and 88. I traveled with Bill Clinton in 92, and that was early in his campaign. More about that later. But there were many adventures covering presidential campaigns. I flew a lot in a media plane that followed the plane carrying the candidate. And we would just go crazy in that we would be in position to shoot video of the candidate boarding Air Force Two or Air Force One, although I never covered the sitting president. So with George Herbert Walker Bush, he was vice president or campaigning for vice president. And so his plane would be Air Force Two. So we would set up to shoot video of the candidate getting on board and taking off. Then we'd race with our camera gear to the media plane, jump on, take off, and we would get ahead of the candidate's plane, Air Force Two, and land and scramble to set up and get the candidate coming off and getting into a limo. Of course, he would wave to everybody and what have you. So normally, I'd be in the media plane. But in 1984, we were invited to come on board Air Force Two to shoot an interview with the sitting vice president, George Herbert Walker Bush. One of his aides took a picture of us interviewing the candidate in his office aboard Air Force Two mid-flight between Spokane, Washington, and Seattle. I was not the cameraman on this shoot. I handled the separate video recorder and audio levels and sat at the desk in that office. And Lou Kidd was on camera shooting the video. Phil Jones was the CBS network correspondent that was traveling with us. So if you're watching a video version of this podcast, you'll see that photograph in that Air Force Two office with then Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush. I'm glad to have that photograph. So we finished the interview, went back to our seats. I was handed juice in one hand and a sandwich in the other hand. I was on an aisle seat. My partner, Lou Kidd, was in the window seat. And suddenly, before I had a chance to strap in, Air Force Two took a nosedive. I went up against the ceiling for a moment and then settled back into my seat. And believe it or not, I only thought about not spilling my drink on Air Force Two and embarrassing myself. You may wonder why I thought about that and not just panicking. It's because when you're in a campaign flying from city to city, the campaign plane will land even in very bad weather. There was one approach in our media plane following Air Force Two, where we landed in a city that was covered by a thunderstorm. And we are rocking back and forth. I had to put my feet up on the seat in front of me to hold on. And we're rocking and dipping and rocking, and thunder is clapping and rain is just blinding. And amazingly, we just touched down. No incident. Okay. Back to this day on Air Force Two between Spokane and Seattle. So I went against the ceiling, trying to keep the juice in my cup, settled back into my seat, and Phil Jones, the correspondent on the other side of the plane and against the window, saw what had happened. And that was a light plane was coming into our left wing when Air Force Two took that dive. It may surprise you, but the pilot of Air Force Two was blamed for that incident by the FAA. He was warned about that plane and told it was up to them to avoid the little plane because Air Force Two had all the avionics. And that didn't happen, and so the pilot of Air Force Two was in trouble for that. Well, that night it was the news of the day. George Herbert Walker Bush, being the nice guy that he is, he availed himself to the cameras to kind of laugh about the incident. It's not a big deal. Remember that the elder Bush was a World War II fighter pilot, and there's film existing where he had to ditch his plane in the water near the aircraft carrier and be rescued out of the water. So he's somewhat of a brave man. And I remember that twice as he got older, he did two parachute jumps as a second person to an instructor, and just to have the experience of parachuting out of an airplane again. And he did it twice, late in his life. He was a man who just wanted to taste adventure, and I admired him for that. So one time we had to get on our media plane to follow the candidate's plane at Andrews Air Force Base in Washington. We loaded up the media plane and we took off. But Air Force Two first went to Detroit to see the last game of the World Series at that time. So we spent some time watching the World Series from the press boxes high up in the stadium. Then we flew on to Los Angeles, and I may have mentioned in an earlier podcast that it was kind of a party atmosphere aboard the media plane. And the most attractive flight attendant you can imagine told me the most dirty, disgusting joke I have ever heard, which, of course, I will not tell here. If you ever see me in person, you might get it out of me, but you'll regret it because it is so disgusting. But I'll never forget this absolutely beautiful flight attendant. She just told the dirtiest joke I ever heard, the most disgusting. Got to L.A. in the middle of the night and continued our coverage from there. It was always an adventure to travel in a presidential campaign. I could only hope for 4 hours of sleep a night. But when you're working for the networks, all that overtime amounts to a lot of money. One of the camera guys said, "See this Rolex? That was the 78 campaign." Or, "I got a pool from the 76, 74, or whatever campaign." It was a lot of money, but it could kill you. I have never been so exhausted in my life. I mean, basic training in the Army did not tire me out like traveling in a presidential campaign tired me out. It was exhausting, and it was adventurous. Well, the night after that night following the incident where Air Force Two had to take a nosedive, George Herbert Walker Bush had a private party with the media. And it just happened that I'm sitting next to him on the couch, and it's off the record. It's just fun. And he was such a nice guy, such a regular guy during that, I'd say 2 to 2.5 hour long little get together that night in the hotel. And we knew the Secret Service protecting the vice president, And so well that when he wanted to take a walk around Chinatown, we would jostle and push up against the Secret Service trying to get a shot, and they'd push back. And then after the president was in his room, the Secret Service and us media would party. Oh, what a relationship going through all that. I also interviewed or shot video of his son, George W. Bush, before he became a presidential candidate and while he was governor of Texas. And when he announced candidacy, the Today Show hired me to spend 3 days with George W. Bush. And I got to know him pretty well. Not as nice as his dad. And I have learned that I went to middle school in Midland, Texas, and it turns out that's where George W. Bush was raised. And we both went to Alamo Junior High in Midland the same year, which also contained Tommy Lee Jones. Now, twice I've interviewed or shot an interview with Tommy Lee Jones, and I'm afraid to tell you he was just a jerk. And the interviews were not serious. They were tongue-in-cheek, actually, both times. One was for a movie promotion. The other was for his relationship with Al Gore. But he didn't want to talk about it. It was like he was just sure we were trying to dig up dirt. They apparently shared a room in college. But anyway, I'm at Alamo Junior High with George W. Bush and Tommy Lee Jones. Not that makes a hill of beans difference about anything, just throwing that little tidbit in. And so I could go on about the Clinton campaign. I was traveling with him early in his campaign, and we were sitting on the tarmac in Little Rock and standing around. Some of the media had to leave. I didn't. But so Bill, stood around saying goodbye to him and offered to take pictures with anybody. And I declined, telling my friend who said to step on in there, I said, nah, he'll never win. Boy, was I wrong. So that's a taste of traveling with a candidate, a presidential candidate, vice presidential candidate. It was a trip being at the tail end of a caravan of cars being escorted through major cities like New York and Houston and what have you, and being the only ones on the road with the local police blocking all entrances and exits to allow us in the motorcade to travel along without being blocked or stopped or having any problem at all. And I would ride in the very last vehicle shooting forward, and I would be in case something happened. I would be the cameraman in the motorcade sometimes, not every time, in case something happens, then I'm in with the motorcade to jump out and start rolling video. But it never came to that. But in the meantime, having the police clear your way and just go at the speed you want through major metropolitan areas was really ego boosting. So thank you for listening. You can also see my YouTube channel at themostexclusiveclub.com. You can see the video of me trying to rescue a puppy that has had About 80 million views between my edit and 4 other edits requested by other media companies at drowningpuppy.com. And you can see a portfolio of my work at donsmith.tv. DONSMITH.TV is in television. Thank you for listening to the most exclusive club.